This Zero Now program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
Let me introduce our most distinguished guest, and Bob Jensen. Bob was actually one of our very first founding advisory council members of Zero Now, and he brings his perspectives and expertise to the table long before we even started. So, with more than 35 years of experience, Bob led the U.S. government's on-the-ground crisis communications efforts after the massive earthquake in Haiti, for the Deepwater Horizon oil response, and for more than 30 major U.S. disasters, including Hurricane Sandy. He was a spokesman for the White House's National Security Council and U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. He also led communications efforts in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Afghanistan during 4 combat zone deployments. He consults with national and state governments as well as major corporations globally, as well as Zero Now. He's always been a go-to for Zero Now and guiding efforts. And so, Bob Jensen, welcome back to Zero Now Conversations. We're very excited to hear and learn more from you about this big topic of disinformation and dealing with school crises.
Great. Thank you, Era. And thank you, everyone, for coming on and listening to me. I've got some things to share with you. I will first start with some slides. I'll try and go through that very quickly. I am not going to be reading anything to you, so it's going to be a little more informal. But this topic of countering disinformation is the number one topic that I get asked about globally, whether it's from corporations or international aid and development organizations or countries. It is the top thing that's happening globally right now. And you probably have seen that the World Economic Forum lists it as one of the top challenges that governments around the world are going to be facing. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and please bear with me. I'm a techno dinosaur, so bear with me as I go through here and hopefully I'll do this correctly. Share.
And Bob, as you're getting that set up, I just want to remind the participants, if you have a question for Bob, please hit the Q&A button and type in your question. We had a lot of questions that came in from registrants. So we'll, as we get through the presentation, we'll have plenty of time for a conversation, answer your questions that you have, as well as the questions that came in online. So, Mr. Jensen.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start going through this. Here's the title, and here's a picture that was picked up by Bloomberg News a couple of years ago, where it showed up on the internet, and someone in Bloomberg saw this and said, "Oh my gosh, this is another attack on the Pentagon." So they put this out on their global feed, but unfortunately, it wasn't true. This is a photo that was generated by AI. And very quickly after it went out on Bloomberg, they got notification from both the military and Washington and Arlington that, hey, no, that's not really true. That didn't happen. But this is just an example. And with things coming out very quickly, lots of things can happen. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. So I'm going to do something a little different here. I'm going to start at the end, right? And people always say, well, what should we be doing to be ready to counter disinformation? Well, here's 6 things, right? Number one, you need to have a plan. I can't tell you how many times I talk to an organization and they don't have a plan for countering disinformation. Second, you need to know what your risks and issues are. I mean, I think you can. I've done this with corporations and countries where I kind of do a risk assessment with them, and you could probably do this sitting around a conference room and say, okay, what kinds of bad things can happen, right? You've got policy issues, you've got health issues, maybe it's food poisoning, a gas leak, measles outbreak like is happening in West Texas right now. You all have been practicing for active shooter. There can be sexual assaults, drug overdoses, explosions or fires or protests. So these are just examples and I just thought of those in 5 minutes, right? And so you all can come up with a much greater list, and you should do that. You should have a pretty good idea what are the things that could happen. And then you want to prepare your communications early, right? Don't wait till the thing happens to figure out what you want. Aaron and I were just talking that one of the challenges for corporations, countries, and schools is that the lawyers want to see everything before anything goes out. And I get that. That's exactly an important thing to do. But you can create some pre-cleared templates, for example. That's just something I want you to think about. You need to become a source of truth. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. And you need to create a team across organizations. So it's not just your school, right? Maybe it's your whole school district. Maybe it's including the police department. Maybe it includes the hospitals. Maybe it includes the mayors. You need to create a team, right? And all be working together. Otherwise, you might be going against each other and contradicting each other. And finally, you need to understand your audiences. The days of saying, "Oh, our audience is the public," that's not gonna cut it. You need to subdivide your audiences into maybe it's parents of seniors, maybe it's business owners. You need to figure out who your audiences are, and then you're gonna communicate a little bit differently to each. So here's what I'm going to talk about. We're going to first start with how we got here, where we are, and I'll do some breakdown of some things. And I'm going to share an 8-step strategy that I give to countries and companies to get them started. It's not the end all be all, but at least it's going to get you started. So how do we get here? What's happening right now is a mix of things that happened over the past 20 years, right? So we have the information age colliding with social change. We have an evolution of the media space. There's no doubt about it, an increase in political divisions. And finally, something that people aren't really haven't been talking about much is there's a shift of public ideas on what are facts and what is the truth. So the media space right now, I see over and over and over again on social media, a lot of my friends are saying, we don't trust mainstream media. Traditional media is, they're horrible. And so there's a lot of, massive audience lost and definitely a loss of trust in the public in national media. And then also with the media itself, the public is changing how it gets its information, right? So when you look at like one of the more trusted sources of information is local, right? Local radio stations, local TV, local newspapers. But guess what? All of those are going away. So many radio stations have gone. So many newspapers have gone out of business. A lot of the TV stations are going away. And then younger people don't watch nightly news, for example. So the generational use and sources of information have completely changed, right? Right now, when you look at social media, 50% of Americans say that's where they get their main source of information from, is social media, not the news. You've got a gazillion cable channels. I know I love Netflix and Prime, and so I'm watching that a lot. And some people never watch the news because they've got so many other choices to watch, streaming movies, etc. And finally, there is definitely a media polarization of politics, right? I don't care who you are, if you're right or left, doesn't matter, in between. You can probably name the different, networks and who they kind of support. And this is happening all over the place. The challenge with this is that you start creating these little echo chambers of information, right? And that makes it harder and harder to decide what is the truth and what is not the truth. So here's a big a challenge right now. Facts are no longer accepted as truth, right? So what we're seeing more and more is people's opinions, perspective are replacing facts. It used to be, hey, go with the science, right? If it's scientifically a fact, then it's got to be true. People no longer believe that. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. What I'm saying is this is what people no longer believe, right? So, for example, the COVID disinformation that really pushed the divide, right? And part of it was, I'm going to say the ineffective use of risk communication by the U.S. government didn't acknowledge the fact that they shouldn't have been saying some very standardized thing. Rather than acknowledging that there's a risk and there's dangers, they tried to make it super simple, and that of course then eroded people's trust in what the scientific facts are. And frankly, right now, most of the public, they don't even know what is disinformation and what is not disinformation, right? Um, some of my dear friends just they immediately repost things and they don't even recognize that what they're reposting is disinformation. So here's where we are today. The challenge, and I talked to a lot of organizations, whether it's companies or countries, everyone is focused on responding to disinformation, right? Oh, disinformation's come out, let's respond. So it's kind of a after the fact, right? And that's not as effective as it could be. And most of them are siloed within their organization, right? So it's a small group that's trying to do all of this stuff. Definitely organizations are not matching the evolution of the media space. And so, and the government is the worst, right? Because the government doesn't understand. So, for example, the US government bans TikTok on all their phones. I get that. Yes, TikTok is giving all your information to the Chinese government. So they should create a system where they allow TikTok to be used on non-government phones because that's where the people are, right? And so if we say, oh, we're not going to use TikTok and that's where a large amount of young people are, then we're kind of missing our audience. We're not going where the audience is. Also, today the public is more divided. And so when you're coming out there and saying things, it's going to be really hard to get a majority of people to agree with you. There's great deal of loss of trust in government and the media. And again, as I mentioned, the shift in ideas of trust, facts, and the truth. A very famous line by Kellyanne Conway, which was talking about Sean Spicer, and said he had alternative facts, whatever that means, right? And so you're going to see these kinds of things coming up more and more. So who's involved? There's a whole range of people involved. It's not just one group to other. It's not just one political group versus another. Both sides, all sides do it. Nations right now, we are actually in hybrid war with other countries like Russia. Definitely in Europe. When I talk to European countries, they show me and we discuss the fact that they are in a gray zone warfare with Russia, with all the disinformation that Russia is pumping into their countries. You've got activist groups and extremists, both left and right, that are out there. You've got transnational criminal organizations. And in fact, these transnational criminal organizations are finding they can make more money online sometimes than some of the other things that they're doing. And of course, you always have these individuals just looking to make money or provoke. That's you're going to have them everywhere, as well as terrorist groups. So I'm not going to get into what happened in the last election. I think you guys probably know yourself, but I'm just going to show you. Here's a couple of things that Russia, put into our Facebook, posts in 2016. And of course, what you'll notice is they weren't, the notion that, oh, the Russians are, wanted President Trump to win. Not true. They wanted to just create division, right? And so they were putting things out on both sides. They did this in the last couple of elections as well. They were just putting things in there because what they wanted was greater division and chaos across America. So they didn't care who won. So these are some examples of 2016. I'm sure you could find your own from 2020 and 2024. So now, what are they trying to do? So this is the key that when you're countering disinformation about your school, district or some incident that happened, it's really important for you to kind of look at it and decide what are they trying to do? What's the point, right? And here are six different things that they're trying to do. Obviously, creating uncertainty, stoking public outrage. This is one of the bigger things. There's lots of things in which different groups are manufacturing rage. This has really been on the uprise in the past couple of years. Reputational damage, of course, companies worry about that more than others. There's also a redirection of action and attention. Now, these are just some of the things that they're trying to do. And so, what I tell clients of mine is that you not just in collecting what they're saying about you, but you have to start to kind of figure out what's the background, what is their bigger purpose or their goal, and this is something you have to look at. Here's an example. was sent by the National Sheriff's Association to support the Morton County Sheriffs in North Dakota as they were dealing with the Dakota Access Pipeline protests in 2017. And here's some stuff that was coming out in which they were trying to raise money, right? It wasn't that they were really trying to help the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. And so this is one example of them doing it, saying, "Oh, the police are raiding and they're burning the teepees." Well, reality is the tribe, Ascent Sioux tribe, they lived in houses. They didn't live in these teepees, right? And so, but a lot of people globally didn't know that. And so they were raising millions of dollars globally about the injustice happening. And my job with the Morton County Sheriffs was to kind of point out what all this disinformation was, but to also help them in their messaging and to say, hey, look, you're not pro pipeline, you're not anti pipeline, you're pro rule of law and public safety, right? And that's walk that line, right? And by the way, here's where that photo came from. It was an HBO special dealing with probably the Western Times, and so they just kind of took this picture and doctored it to make it look like it was in winter there in North Dakota. So how do they do it? Really, really easy to do right now, and it's just going to get worse. For example, AI is going to make it worse. With AI, they can generate tens of thousands of pieces of disinformation relatively easy, right? And it's just gonna and y'all have probably gotten the fake text messages saying, "Oh, is this Joe or is this Kathleen?" And I saw your number, and that what they're trying to do is get you to trying to give them information so they can try and con you into buying Bitcoin and just taking your money or whatever. There's a lot of that stuff. It's all AI generated, right? These chatbots. So that's kind of happening. A lot of fake social media accounts. Now the platforms are trying to do a better job of scrubbing their social media accounts, but literally there are millions and millions of fake accounts on there. There's tens of thousands of fake news websites. So when schools say, "Oh, we need to teach literacy to our students," and why don't you go and check the sources? Well, you have to tell them also that, hey, half of those sources and half those news websites aren't real, right? And how do you figure that out, right? Lots of targeted emails, disinformation, memes, ads on social media. It's all out there, right? Internet trolling, especially in comment sections. A lot of this disinformation is coming there as well. And of course, the ever-present botnets. Why are they successful? The top three are really the key things. One is they're playing off confirmation bias in the public, meaning they take some things that are kind of true, maybe not completely true, but they already kind of know where people are leaning. And so they kind of play off of that. And then when people see something that they somewhat believe in, even if it's disinformation, they'll be like, yep, I knew it. So, for example, here's an example the information that just came out a little while ago about uh, um, FEMA giving $59 million to put immigrants in a luxury hotel. Partially true, but not really the truth, right? It's not the whole truth. And so, of course, that created outrage across the public, like, how dare they? But when you really kind of break it down, this was a sheltering program set up by Congress to house these immigrants, and it was definitely something that was already approved last year. And it's not a luxury hotel anymore. It was a hotel that shut down during COVID. So again, if you kind of peel back the layers like you peel back an onion, you're going to kind of get more to the truth. But the reality is the people are putting out this disinformation. They know that the public's not going to do that. They're not going to take the time to go, well, is this really true? And that's the big challenge. The second thing is they use emotional triggers. And the challenge I know when I was with the U.S. government is when we first started dealing with disinformation, back in 2012, for example, during Hurricane Sandy, our first inclination was, well, put the facts out, and we'll just put facts out. But the reality is that yes, you have to kind of put the facts out, but you have to also understand what were the emotions that were being triggered there. And if you don't address the emotions, people aren't going to listen to your facts, right? And also the other thing is just like marketers, um, people who are sowing disinformation, they do what's called social network analysis. The Russians are really good with this, and so they can figure out who are the nodes in all these social networks that are the center point for most of the interactions, and they kind of lob in information, disinformation into those people, and then those people will spread it virally, and they do the work for them. Right. And so this is very similar to marketing. Marketing does the same thing. And so they're using those same uh, uh, concepts in spreading disinformation. Again, there's a lot of other things. I'm not going to get too deep into some of this stuff here. Here's an example of the protesters. They were trying to raise money. They didn't really care about the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. They were just trying to scam people out of money. So they said, "Oh, look, this person was injured, and trying to raise money." And we pointed that out, by the way, to the Standing Rock Sioux tribe to say, "Hey, you must be very happy. You're getting millions of dollars." And they were like, "What? Wait, what? We're not getting any money." And I said, "Well, we're going to help you try and shut this down." This photo here came from a Day of the Walking Dead series, right? And so again, a lot of these images can be manipulated to make people think that they're real. So technology makes it easier to do. Again, AI software for voice and video now. It used to be, it was super expensive and, only like big movie companies and other groups with lots of money could use it. Now it's super cheap. And I'm going to show you an example of something I did in Midjourney. So you've got ChatGPT and Midjourney. This is just putting out lots of stuff, but it also helps you too. So you can use the technology. So what we did up there in North Dakota, we took a lot of the images. We did a reverse image search through Google and TinEye, and then we found out where they came from. And then we started putting that up online saying, "Hey, just want you to know this is where that image came from, not real." And also, there's new technology coming out that will be able to more quickly identify when an image has been manipulated and when video is AI generated. That's all coming out fairly shortly, and it's going to get cheaper and cheaper. And I think you should. It may not be each school has that. Maybe you work together as a group, but you need to have someone get this new technology to help you out. So here's an example. I did this on Midjourney. I put in the prompts. I said I wanted a picture showing the U.S. Capitol burning with fire engines and flames and smoke. It took 60 seconds to create that on Midjourney. And then I could tweak it. I could do all kinds of things to it. So again, if I could do that in 60 seconds, and of course, you're seeing this in a much bigger size. Most people, when they see an image, it's going to be very small. You're going to see it on your smartphone, and people will react emotionally before they go, "Whoa, let me zoom in and make sure if that's a real photo or not." They're going to react. And so again, a lot of people are going to get fooled. So again, I just want to give you an example. And if you haven't tried Midjourney, you should try it out. It's a very interesting new software program. Almost costs nothing to use. So now, yeah, I've kind of said what they're doing and how easy it is, and it's proliferating. I know I don't need to tell you that. You're seeing it. We need to refocus, right? And so we need to do a lot more on prediction and prevention, right? I'll talk a little bit more about that. And the other thing that I talk about is too many governments and companies, they go after each piece of disinformation. So it's kind of like a whack-a-mole. Like, oh, something comes out, they go out to debunk it. They keep doing that. And so it's like whack-a-mole. And the reality is, if you're doing that, you have to do a little bit of that, but you're really kind of wasting a lot of your time because they'll just keep spewing more, right? It's more important that you look at, as I said earlier, why are they doing this? What is their narrative? What is it they're trying to put out there as a story against your organization? And if you can understand why they're doing it and understand the narrative, right, that they're trying to put out there, you can do a counter narrative, right, to counter what they're saying. And that's going to be a lot more, it's a little bit harder, but it's a lot more effective than going after each individual piece of disinformation. And in fact, frankly, if you can put your narrative out even before they start coming after you, then you're going to be in a much better shape. Now, obviously, we need to share information. It's critical. One of the biggest things that I find is Everyone thinks that they have to do it themselves. But the fact is, almost every school in the United States faces very similar issues and risks, right? Everyone's facing the active shooter, everyone's facing, sexual assault, drug use, all kinds of other things. Um, and so what's happened is now the active shooter is kind of everyone is sharing how they do that and is doing a better job. We should be doing the same exact thing in developing shared information about countering disinformation, right? What are the messages that work? What are the plans? How do you do a plan? Why should every single school have to come up with their own when we should be sharing best practices and global lessons learned, right? Working collaboratively. Again, this is where the whole sharing comes in, and I think Zero Now is doing a great job of helping groups work collaboratively to make schools safer. And this should be another area that they do that. And again, you need to rebuild public trust. There are some schools that have had a really hard time. Maybe something bad happened, and the parents and the communities that have lost trust in the leadership of that school, right? Um, and so you have to figure out how do we rebuild it, and you rebuild it not after an incident happens, but before, right? You need to start that process, and it's going to take you a while. And finally, you need to communicate strategically. So it's not just oh, we're going to put a press release out, or we're going to have a press conference. That's great. But by the way, press releases are the least effective public relations tool, and you might as well not even do them. So you need to think about who it is you're trying to communicate to, and where do they get their information, right? They might not be waiting till the 5 o'clock news, right? And you need to get information out much quicker. So you got to think about that and what platforms you're going to put information out on. So here's an 8-step strategy. I give this to countries. I'm giving it to you. I'm going to go through it very quickly. I know that they're recording this briefing so that you'll be able to get that from their recording. Number one, detect and collect disinformation. If you're not monitoring social media and other information sources to see if you're targeted, then you're already losing, right? Because if you don't even know if people are spreading disinformation, how can you fight it, right? So that's number one. You need to know if you're being targeted. Then start looking at who's doing it. What are the sources, right? And start doing network maps of who's targeting your organization. Look at the attacks and the messaging, right? Start creating it and say, okay, what are the messages? What are they saying? And then what is the larger narrative and what do you think their objectives are? If you understand that, then it'd be much easier for you to develop a counter narrative and counter messaging. Again, I've said this a couple times, coordinate with our other organizations. Let's say if it's a school shooting or people are putting out disinformation about something that happened, you're going to definitely be coordinating with the police, maybe with the hospital, the mayor's office. So you all should be working together, right, to make sure that you're all putting out consistent information, you're putting it out at the same time, or you're getting it out as early as possible. Again, if there are rumors, then you need to, do some rumor control. And that's something that you might, especially in the middle of an incident or in the middle of some kind of an issue, it might be hard for you to do it. But if you have other organizations that you're working with, they can help you, right? And that's something that you need to look at. Definitely, don't just think about press releases. Think about graphics, video, and other things to hit the audience, right? Because if you look at how young people today, they scroll through their phones, right? And you have 1 second to catch their attention, and something that's just words probably is not going to catch their attention. So you need to think about that. How do you catch their attention? And then you need to have a joint and coordinated strategy, right, across multiple platforms. And you have to really kind of think about it. Like, who are you trying to reach, right? If you say, well, we only use X or we only use Facebook, but maybe that's not where your audiences go to get their information. Maybe they're on Blue Sky, maybe they're on Instagram or TikTok. So you need to understand where they are because if you just put it out only on the platforms that you use, they might not see it. And then you're wondering, well, we put all that information out, what happened? Well, because you're not hitting the audiences, your key audiences, where they go to get their information. Finally, you need to constantly measure what's working. And if it's not working, then you need to adjust, right? And finally, I can't say enough about after something happens, learning from your successes and failures and then sharing that, right? And because if something happens to your school, it's probably going to happen to 20, 30, 40 other schools and vice versa. Maybe some things are happening at another school and you can learn from them about what worked and what didn't work. So again, really quickly, here's a quick wrap up of the approach. Set up a process to know if you're targeted, predict what issues will arise and prepare for them. Again, this is where you might want to do some tabletop exercising where you say, okay, we had this incident. Who do we think is going to be talking about this? Who are our main audiences? What should we be saying? Oh, let's get the lawyers in here to say, can we do some pre-clear templates so we can make sure we get information out as quickly as we can? Think about what the people who are putting out disinformation, what they might counter with, and then you need to be ready for that. Understand how to identify narrative. There's lots of good resources on that. Take action. This is the most important. So there's three terms here: inoculate, pre-bunk, and debunk. So inoculate means you're putting in information before anything happens. So if you're going to come up with a new, let's say I'm going to make this up. You're going to come up with a new policy that says we're switching all bathrooms in all schools to unisex bathrooms, and they'll be individually locked. And you need to put information out that you're going to do that, and you need to understand that you're going to have a lot of people really upset, right, by this new policy. So you inoculate by having, we're going to have hearings, we're going to get people's opinions, and we're going to put information out so that the information that's put out there shows that you had a thoughtful process to get input on this. And when you finally do make a decision, right, and you announce the thing, that's not the first time that parents and the public have heard about it, right? Pre-bunking means something is going to come out. Maybe you're going to announce. We just had one of our teachers arrested for something bad, and you're going to announce that, and you're coordinating with the police, and you know that there's going to be probably some disinformation. Well, before that disinformation comes out, you come out and say, look. We just want to make sure everyone knows that this is, there may be these rumors, not true. And finally, debunking means you're going to go out and say, that's not true. Here's what the truth is. Again, working together to create an information sphere. And this is where, one school by itself is not going to be as effective as all of the groups working together, along with other organizations that are tied to what you're doing, whether it's the mayor's office, hospitals, police, fire department, etc. And finally, become a source of truth, right? You need to figure out how do you regain public trust, because the public is losing trust in government and any kind of government organization. So you need to figure out how do we do that? And there's a lot of ways to do that. I'm not going to get into it here, but there's plenty of sources online that can talk about regaining public trust. So that's all I've got for this. I kind of went through it very quickly. You can contact me, on X or on Blue Sky, and I'm happy to, share information with you. Or you can connect with me through Zero Now, and I'll share whatever you want. So let me get out of this and stop sharing, and then we'll open up for questions.
Great. And we're back. So thank you, Bob. Yeah, one question so like I mentioned, we over the last week we've had roundtables with school safety directors, school administrators, school board members, superintendents, and one of the things that always comes up at the beginning of the conversation is what is the difference between disinformation, misinformation, and I think you mentioned malinformation yesterday.
Right. Yes. Okay. So the disinformation is really just kind of one piece. The whole science it's called information disorder, right? Where there's all different kinds of things out there because we're in an information age, and there's an avalanche of information. There's so much out there, and it's hard to tell what's true, what's not true, and sometimes the sources of information may put out information that's not necessarily the truth or the whole truth. I mean, I know you probably saw the news about the Delta plane that flipped over and the wings fell off it in Toronto yesterday. And I was watching the nightly news, and one said, "Oh, 15 people were hurt," and another said 18. Well, what's the truth? Well, the truth was later 18. The one network should have said, as of this time, we only know of, right? And so they didn't quite put context around that. So there's 10 different types, and I'm only going to talk about three. One is misinformation. That means some information is put out and people see it and they misinterpret it. They don't really understand it and they spread it, not trying to be bad. They're like, oh, you should know about this, but it's not. They didn't know that it was wrong. The second is disinformation, and that is where the people have created it and they did it on purpose to have a negative intent. And then the third is called malinformation. And that is where you take something that's actually true, but you take it out of context, and then you reframe it so that it takes on a different meaning. And there's a lot of that going on right now. So those are just three types of the 10 types of information disorder. And I tend to focus on disinformation, but really what I'm talking about can work for all of those. So.
Well, and some of our school board folks are talking about how everything is politically charged nowadays, and there are parents that that have an agenda or have concerns, and are you take a kernel of information or kernel of truth, and that serves as a seed for disinformation. There's some kernel of truth behind what the topic is, or whatever the issue is. So that's an interesting thing. Now, the question is, how do you get? Somebody asked, how do you control the spread of misinformation, disinformation? How do you control all the messages going on social media from if you're a school district, a superintendent, a principal? How do you control that information?
Well, control is a very tough thing, and I'm just going to say that with every single student having a smartphone, right, and all their parents and whatnot, there is no way that a superintendent or school can control the information. It's impossible. It's just like the military now uses the information domain as another domain of warfare, by the way. And so in other domains like the domain of air, the U.S. Air Force tries to go for air dominance, meaning we control the air, or maritime dominance, we control the seas. But the military itself says there's no way to have information dominance unless well, maybe China can do that because they do control, but that's a whole different political system in a free country that talks about democracy and free speech, et cetera, and there's all these different sources. There's no way for you to control and have information dominance. What you can have is information advantage. Okay, information advantage. And what that means is, number one, you have a plan, and you put information out. You're doing a lot of inoculation. So, for example, when you do the drills about active shooter, right, you're kind of putting information out there, and you're building confidence and trust in the students that hey, if something bad happens, they all know what to do, right? And so, oh, you're gonna get information from the teachers, right, or from the superintendent, and so they now you've got information advantage that if they hear something from the superintendent or whoever is supposed to be giving the information out, then they're going to believe it. So you need to be thinking about the outside to say, okay, have you set up channels in which parents know that should something bad happen, this is the channel we're going to use, and or different channels we're going to use to get information out to you, so that they're going to look for your information in a certain place. Then you're also going to put it out in other channels as well, because some people might not have got the message right. So my point is, um, you have to do several things. One, you put things out earlier, you get people to understand this is where it's going to come from. And then when an incident happens, right? the faster you put information out, even if it's not complete, the better you're going to be in terms of maintaining information advantage, right? And Era, we talked about a holding statement, and we used to use it for the U.S. government. We had a thing that if there's something bad happening in the United States, we needed to put something out. Once we found out about it, less than 30 minutes later, we had to put some kind of statement out. And it usually was a holding statement because we didn't have all the facts. And so we'd say, look, we are aware of of this incident happening. We're working with local officials and our partners on the ground. We ask you to follow the instructions of local officials and law enforcement, and we will put out more information in 30 minutes or whatever, right? So we come right out and say we don't have all the information, but we know what's going on and we're working to find out more. And so we maintain information advantage, and they know that we're doing something, right? Because if we wait until we know everything, other people go, oh, the government doesn't know this is going on, and this is what's happening, and you name it, it's gonna just it's like what happened during Hurricane Helene and Milton. Oh, even had members of Congress saying, oh, the government created the hurricane. So like, okay, come on, right? But some people believe that, right? So again, you have to have a plan, and you have to have processes in place. You have to pre-script stuff. You have to have your partners helping you to maintain information advantage. Hopefully that answers your question there.
It does, and I'd like to just go a little deeper on the holding message and in preparation for that, because as many folks on here know, and you know this as well, I was a parent on the receiving end of a situation where the high school was under lockdown, but we weren't communicated with until almost an hour later, and word was spreading online, misinformation. Students were texting, posting, parents were reposting, Instagram, Facebook, social media, just across the board. And the question is, how soon is too soon? So if you're a school and you decide we are going under lockdown, how soon after that decision is made do you communicate with that holding message, and what should that message say, that initial message?
Yeah. Well, um, I think that when you decide your school is going to go on lockdown, someone made that decision based on whatever facts they have or whatever information they have at that time. I've heard of schools going on lockdown prematurely, but it's okay where you can say, out of an abundance of caution, we wanted to make sure everyone's safe, so we decided to put the lockdown. We checked everything's okay now. But if it isn't okay, I think the fact that once you put that school on lockdown, very soon after that, you better be putting out information that the school is locked down, right? And the reason is that every kid in that school is going to be texting their parents going, oh my gosh, we're in lockdown. I don't know what's going on. I don't hear any gunfire, but we're in lockdown and I'm scared, right? And so it's within, less than a minute, it's going to be going out, everywhere. So if you're not framing it, then you've lost information advantage. So.
So you're saying within the minute, getting ahead of the message that, so if you decide
Sure.
to go under lockdown,
I
put
mean,
it
if
out there.
if if you made the decision to lock the school down, obviously you had enough information to make that decision and feel that it was the right thing to do, right? Because here's what happens is, and I say this to usually to government organizations, a government organization will make a decision on something. I go, and what we would do in a government organization is we would create what's called a TikTok, not the social media app, but it's basically we learned of this incident at this time. We confirmed the information with whatever source. We put out our holding statement at this time. So we would start saying by the minute when we were putting information out to the public, because what happens is something bad goes on, and if people don't get information and more lives are lost, or whatever, later on there's always going to be an investigation, and the investigation is going to ask a couple things like who knew about this, right? And when did you tell the public, right? That those are always two of the questions that get asked, which is why when I was with the U.S. government, we are dealing with crisis. We always had by the minute, So we could say, well, when they'd say, well, why didn't you tell the public about X, Y, or Z? Well, sir, we didn't find out about that until this minute. And then 2 minutes later, we put out information related to that. So we kind of justify what we're doing. And again, that's what I'm saying. Um, you should have a process and you should be walking through about what you're doing do tabletop exercises where you say, okay, this bad thing happens. What do you do? What do you say? Who needs to know this? Because depending on the different situations, it's not always everybody, right? So let's say um, someone overdoses in one of the school bathrooms, right? Does everybody need to know that right away? Probably not, so maybe people will find out about it later, but immediately the family of that student that overdosed needs to know immediately, right? And so again, it depends on the situation, the order, and who gets notified, and you should be kind of thinking that through. Does that kind of make sense? So,
Exactly. And so would you recommend thinking that through, like looking at all the possible scenarios that can happen well in advance? Because we heard from school administrators like, well, it needs to go through legal review. Like we can't send anything out until it goes through legal review. Just make sure that we protect ourselves from a liability perspective. But wouldn't you recommend, crafting pre-scripted messages,
yes.
holding messages, if you will, well in advance with your chief communications officer, the legal department, whoever else should be at the table, what should we communicate? And so
Yep.
that way you're not thinking about it. Like, okay, we have a lockdown, we've got a
Yep.
chemical spill, we have a fire situation, whatever that is.
Yeah, and I've dealt with large corporations which the lawyers kind of held a tight control over what information would go out, and one of them was an oil company, and they brought me in because of my experience with Deepwater Horizon, and I said, let's walk through your process and how long does it take to get information out, and literally it was days. And I said, in those days when you don't put information out, especially about like an oil spill, the public's going to skewer you, and you've just had irreparable reputational damage that's going to hurt you in the long run. So I get it. You kind of worry about liability, and you should. But I think you can work with the legal teams, and that's what I did with this particular oil company. We worked through and said, okay, here's all the different scenarios. Here's the information that really needs to go out. The public needs to know this to make decisions about their own safety, and you need to be transparent so it also doesn't look like you're trying to hide something, right? Because that does reputation damage as well. So again, when we did that, and the lawyer, the legal team would see all the different templates, they're like, oh yeah, we could live with that, and they might make some changes. That's okay. But once we were done, there's a whole series of templated messages depending on the situation that they really just had to fill in certain blank spots like the time something happened or where it happened or the scale, but it was already pre-approved. And so they didn't have to go to the lawyers and say, oh, and because bad things don't always happen like 9 to 5. Uh, Sometimes they happen in the middle of the night. And so there's always some kind of an operational team, and they're able to put stuff out very quickly. So again, that's best practice. That's global best practice. So
Absolutely. Hey, Bob, we have just under 10 minutes left, but we have a lot of questions. And just I want to remind our participants, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A. And what we don't answer here, we're going to move this over to the Zero Now community. So, Bob, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit after the program ends, just to go respond to some of the questions we haven't had a chance to answer yet.
sure.
I'll just run through a couple of these questions here. So, we have a question here. Can you share inoculation best practices?
Sure. Well, inoculation best practices really is um, um, several things. Number one, it's not very different than your normal public relations, right? The problem I saw with a lot of organizational social media, for example, is they'd have like an X account, or they'd have Instagram, and they put everything on it, right? And so you'd have everything from serious information to hey, here's a recipe for apple pie, and oh, come down to the family fair, and so people didn't know. Should I be looking at that? And so that I would tell them, you need to create some kind of a channel that when things come out from this channel, it's only serious stuff, right? And so that they always know if something. The other thing is to get people to buy into, a reverse, or the SMS, right? Not everyone's going to want to do that, but it certainly, I think if I was a parent, I'd want to be notified right away. That's a simple thing. There's multiple companies out there that have these processes, and it's not very expensive. So again, every now and then you should be putting out information to say, um, we are always concerned about the safety and well-being of every single one of our students, as well as our faculty and staff in all of our schools. So we're going to do active shooter drills. We want you to know what that's about. Or we're going to do a drill to deal with earthquakes. Or we're going to do, and so you're putting out information, being transparent about what you're doing, and then you say, should something happen, and we hope it never does, but if it does, here's how we're going to put information out. So the inoculation is that you're putting out information to let them know, that you're preparing, right? And so that's already a reputational thing that, hey, these guys are trying to do their best. And um, again, you're putting out that message that everything we're doing is for the safety of our students, right? So that's a narrative that you're putting out there. So there's no, again, I don't want to say that here's one process that works, but it's basically understanding what are the things that you need to have in place to have an effective countering of disinformation or misinformation, and that is a reputation that your school and your school system is doing the best it can to make sure everyone's safe, right? We always say it. Oh, like I can't tell you how many companies say, our people are our number one asset. Okay, that's great. You said it, but now show it. So our students, we value every student. We're going to keep them safe. Now show it, and that's part of the inoculation where you start showing over time. These are all the different things we're doing, and here's how we're going to communicate, et cetera. So hopefully that answers that question.
I think so, and yeah, part of that is building a relationship well in advance. I mean,
Yes,
because we all know there's different styles of administrators. Being in front, communicating, be out in front of a situation, developing a relationship with parents and the community versus being more remote, if you will, not as visible and being transparent. Those are all key important factors. Let's see here. Chris Ryan asks, and we'll probably have time just for one or two more questions. What is the most effective way to communicate during an emergency? Paul, I know you mentioned like text messages, emails, like mass notification. Is that would you say that's the primary way to communicate? Are there other ways? Like how do you reach people on social media? How do you reach the public that may not be parents if there's a public facing situation?
right. Uh, Again, you have to have a broad spectrum of channels, right? So traditional media is one channel. You can't forget them, but you can't rely on them to be the only channel. Social media is another channel. Um, for example, when I was with the U.S. government with Homeland Security, we used companies. We provided information to all the big box stores and a lot of companies. For example, I made an agreement with Walmart, and we found that if we go through Walmart's system and they put information out to all their employees, and if we reached their employees and their employees' family with one company, we reached 3% of the American population, right? With one company. And so we put out all kinds. So again, you might have find out, well, 30% of this one company, they have parents who have kids in our schools. Maybe you find that out, right? And then you might work an agreement with that company to say, if something bad happens, we're going to let you know. And so that you can let your employees know, because maybe when they're at work, they're not looking at their phones and they're not watching the news. And so again, there's a lot of different ideas. And so I would look at your audiences, ask the parents, um, what is the easiest way for us to connect with you, right? And maybe we can't do individual phone calls, but maybe it's text, maybe it's going through their workplace, maybe it's working with churches, faith-based groups. There's a lot of different, and I think about it works, and depending on the situation, um, will which parts of those networks. It's not like you're gonna blast everyone all the time, but maybe you use certain ones for the specific situation. So,
No doubt, and we are out of time, so we're definitely going to move the questions that were not answered here live to the community, Bob, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And is there any final words of wisdom that you like to impart with our participants before you wrap things up?
Sure. I really appreciated the fact that Eric came to me even before he established Zero Now, and this is a really great group. And you've got incredible resources nationwide, and I just can't stress enough that you all should be working together, right? So each school doesn't have to do it on its own. Work together, start sharing lessons learned, start sharing, best practices, start sharing what are the messages you use, how does it work, what are the processes you use, start sharing that so that each group doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, and you learn from each other. So that's the number one thing that's going to help you.
I'm glad you said that because that is the whole point of Zero Now is to learn from one another and make this collective impact.